Welcome to Stars Matter, a recruiting podcast from The Athletic. I'm Mitch Light, joined, as usual, by Ari Wasserman. Ari, today we've got a very, very special guest, a first-time guest to Stars Matter. Jesse Temple covers the University of Wisconsin. Ari, why don't you tell everyone why we've never had Jesse on before? Do you know why?
I've done a million podcasts with Jesse, but I think it's because they weren't recruiting at an interesting enough level to talk about it.
There you go. There you go. Jesse now covers a team. We'll introduce Jesse in a second, but as he just described, always good, never great program that never seemed overly interested in recruiting at a high level or doing being overly aggressive in recruiting. They bring in Luke Fickell from Cincinnati. Great hire. Jesse, first of all, welcome to Stars Matter. Second of all, tell us how much your job has changed in the past 2 months.
Jesse, I got to say, that was kind of a rough first minute for Wisconsin fans. So you got to.
Well, I'm going to set Mitch straight. let me tilt my head a little bit.
Yeah.
It is an honor and a privilege to be joining you, fine folks, on the Stars Matter podcast. It's been Luke Fickell coming has been a godsend from a coverage standpoint. I've been covering the Badgers since 2011, and they've had some tremendous seasons. The last 3 seasons were, shall we say, less than stellar, particularly from an offensive standpoint. And I think the fans were ready for something different. The fact it happened when it did was shocking. That Paul Chryst got fired October 2nd, midway through the season. And then Jim Leonard, the prodigal son, was the interim coach and didn't end up getting the job. But if you're not going to give it to him, you don't give it to him because you go out and get the best coaching hire of the cycle in Luke Fickell. And clearly what they've done the last 2 months has generated a level of excitement that I have not seen before. I don't want to be a prisoner of the moment or speak in hyperbole, but for an off season, I've never seen it like this because of the types of players they're getting. Obviously, the transfer portal adds fuel to this, which didn't exist several years ago in the way that it does now. But from a recruiting standpoint, I will say that the previous staff had a really good run. There was a stretch where they did, at least in 2019, 2020, and 2021. They had the 3 best recruiting classes in the online ranking era in program history 3 years in a row. They got up to number 16 in 2021. Now, obviously, it didn't necessarily pan out on the field, but there was a stretch where, and I think part of why Paul Chryst is no longer the coach, it starts with not having the results you want on the field, but they didn't fill their recruiting department for 8 months. Their director of recruiting left for Michigan State. They made some internal moves to kind of fill gaps, and Paul had his reasons for wanting to do that. He felt like they were in a good spot in the previous class. He didn't want to rush something, and he wanted to make the right move. But I think in doing that, pretty clearly, it put Wisconsin at a disadvantage. That's not how Luke Fickell operates. And I will say Paul eventually filled his staff. He had an 8-person staff. He had a director of recruiting, but I think the optics weren't great. Luke brought 2 of his top recruiting guys over with him from Cincinnati immediately. Those were his 2 big things when he started, was recruiting and the strength program. And that's why he immediately brought his guys from Cincinnati. And they've had a great run. I know we'll get into it, but that's the short version to create so much excitement.
Now, there's so many different ways we can go here, but Ari and I always talk about, and Ari writes, and it was in his mailbag that was published Wednesday morning, certain programs like Ohio State recently. Obviously, they've recruited great. This recruiting class this year, you look at it on paper, it's Ari, number 5. It's got a good average player rating, but 3 of the top guys are wide receivers, and that's a position that's really not of need at Ohio State. Would you say, and I've looked at some of the numbers of Wisconsin, that while they did recruit well and probably better than some people thought with that class in the teens, that a lot of their recruiting was just based in kind of one position, offensive line? While that's very, very important, that's the program's identity, that their good recruiting wasn't necessarily spread out enough to create a roster that could win the Big Ten. Is that fair?
I think that's a very good way to put it, Mitch. If you look at the success that Wisconsin's traditionally had, it has obviously started in the state. And what does this state produce? Big dudes. That's what Barry Alvarez saw 30-plus years ago. Their 2020 class was led by 2 4-star in-state offensive linemen. Their 2021 class was a little different. They had a 4-star offensive lineman, but they also had a 4-star safety in Hunter Wohler and a 4-star athlete in Braylon Allen who turned into a running back. He reclassified from 2022. But quarterback, wide receiver, those are positions that you haven't necessarily seen Wisconsin upgrade in a way that matches what you've seen other programs. Wisconsin did land Graham Mertz in that 2019 class. He was the highest rated prep quarterback Wisconsin had ever signed in the internet ranking era. And I wrote as much about that as I possibly could. People couldn't get enough. And now he's been a 3-year starter and transferred out of the program at Florida. And it's funny with this whole idea of stars matter, and I know that's Ari's mantra, and that is true. And obviously, as we've seen, it doesn't.
Just if you want to be a two-time member, a two-time guest on this show, you got to watch it.
It doesn't guarantee anything, as we've seen, and so I think Graham was in a position where the expectations were so high. He's going to be the person to lead this program to the college football playoff, and it never happened. He had a good career. It just never was going to match what Wisconsin needed. But bringing it back to the Luke Fickell era, it's not so much about the high school recruiting that they did in 2023, which they deserve a lot of credit for. Wisconsin's class was down to 8 players because of decommitments. They had 60 commitments with all this coaching transition. He got it up to a 15-player class. And he added 2 players who previously decommitted from the program. You almost never see that. You almost never see, especially at a place like Wisconsin, kids decommit from the school and end up coming back. And he added some very quality depth in the defensive backfield. But it's the transfer portal. And I think that's why you guys are having me on. At least that's my assumption. Because they have a top 15 transfer portal class. And to your point, Mitch, they added 3 former 4-star quarterbacks that are transfers, which we've never seen before like that, and 2 wide receivers who have a chance to be instant difference makers. Bryson Green, who was a wide receiver at Oklahoma State, was the team's 2nd leading receiver. CJ Williams, who was a 4-star high school recruit at a Mater Dei in California, went to USC, transferred, hasn't had a ton of opportunities at the college level, but might have as much upside as any wide receiver Wisconsin's had. So they have 13 or 14 transfers that they've brought in, but those are the 5 that have generated so much excitement. I should probably mention by now, since we're about 7 minutes into the show, the name Tanner Mordecai. You're going to hear him an awful lot. You're going to see him an awful lot. He's going to be Wisconsin's starting quarterback, was a 2-year starter at SMU, threw 7,152 yards and 72 touchdowns. Like, he's the best quarterback Wisconsin's had since Russell Wilson, and he hasn't taken a snap.
Can I do a few rapid fire questions?
Yeah, Ari, sorry for the interruption, because I know you got questions. I do want to say, while this is going to be a heavy on the Wisconsin Badgers, it's not a 100% Wisconsin Badgers show. We will go over some of the big commitments. There's actually some notable 2024 commitments. We'll have a trivia question for Jesse. I hope you're not prepared, because then you might guess what I was going to ask, and then we might hit some mailbag questions. So go ahead, Ari.
Yes, yeah. It's never one school completely, but just rapid round. Jesse, what would you do if Graham Mertz was a Heisman finalist of Florida this year?
Based on that, sounds like he's not very confident in that happening, Ari.
Oh no, I would applaud him. I mean, from my perspective, he always showed up to answer really difficult questions. There was a stretch here where that was not necessarily the case with some of the other team leaders who just didn't feel like they were mentally, I think, ready to handle it during a really difficult season. He always took accountability and responsibility. It's just that the results weren't what people wanted. I think he's going to have an opportunity to have some very good success at Florida. I think they run more of a pistol type offense, and I think that's something that he could do well in. And the what if that Badgers fans may not care about anymore is, what would Graham Mertz have done in a Phil Longo coached offense? Right. That's another part of this equation that I should mention. So Luke Fickell hired Phil Longo, who was the offensive coordinator at North Carolina for the last 4 years, was previously at Ole Miss, was at Sam Houston when Jeremiah Briscoe broke the FCS record, 57 touchdowns in a single season. He's had success everywhere running an air raid offense. And that's another massive component of this conversation and why people are so excited. Phil Longo is bringing an offense Wisconsin has never run before. They're still going to emphasize running the ball, but now because they've upgraded wide receiver and quarterback, they're going to try to get the ball to the playmakers and pass the ball a whole heck of a lot more. I think Graham actually would have had more success in this offense as opposed to the pro-style system they had at Wisconsin. But Heisman finalist feels like a bit of a leap to me.
And I was just kidding about that, but you never know. The thing I remember distinctly, and I think it might have been 2 years ago or even 3 years ago now, where I was watching a Wisconsin football game, and it was just like they couldn't run the ball very well, and they had no answers when that happened. And I tweeted something about, like, when can Wisconsin update its identity and bring its team into the 21st or 20 whatever century we're in now? And people went bonkers. They're like, the reason why Wisconsin's been the most consistent program in the Big Ten West and one of the most consistent programs in college football is that they know what they are and they're never going to stray from it. And I always thought that was kind of an interesting dynamic of like, okay, well, I could buy that. Like, if they know the types of players they want to bring into their program and the system that they want to run that can get them to 10 games consistently without ever having an opportunity to break through that ceiling, but just be who they are, which is consistently good. Okay, fine. But like when I see Luke Fickell come in and I see Phil Longo come in as the offensive coordinator, I feel like, isn't this an enhancement to who is this an enhancement to who they are, or is it a departure from what they were?
I look at it more as an enhancement. And I look at it like it's exactly what this program needed to infuse some energy and potentially get Wisconsin to that next level. Now, the Badgers have been on the outside looking in of the playoff in the BCS era. They were never able to make it to the championship game. And it's kind of funny because now that college football is expanding to a 12-team playoff, I think Wisconsin is kind of perfectly positioned to be one of those teams that can jump into that category, because I think that the Badgers would have made a 12-team playoff had it existed in the BCS era on like 8 different years. So that's how close they've been in terms of being a good program, but never elite or great. And I think these changes are much needed because it's not like they're going to stray from being physical up front and running the ball. And that was honestly the first thing Phil Longo said. We had an opportunity to talk to Phil Longo and Mike Tressel, who are the new offensive and defensive coordinators for Wisconsin, last month. Longo wants to make it clear he's going to still run the ball. I think fans were freaking out when they heard the word air raid and they thought, oh my God, it's going to be a drastic departure. And in some sense it is, because we haven't seen that style of offensive system, but they have Braylon Allen and Ches Malusi, a tremendous 1-2 running back tandem. They've still got as much talent on the offensive line as a lot of programs around. And that's going to be a staple. It's just that the ratio needs to change. You can't just run the ball for 3 yards on 1st and 2nd down, and then you're in third and medium, or 3rd and long or something, and it's obvious what you're going to do. That was a big part of the problem with Wisconsin, and you can even look at last year. No team faced more stacked boxes, 8 or 9 guys in the box, as much as Wisconsin, other than the 3 service academies. Well, they run the triple option, so that tells you that defenses knew what was coming and they were able to stop it. So I do think it's more of an enhancement, even though it is a slight departure. Fickell understands what has worked well at Wisconsin. It's just making the areas they struggled in better.
I hope Wisconsin goes 5 wide on their first 5 offensive plays.
That would be very exciting.
You might have done the research and I mean, I remember, watching Longo back to his Ole Miss days and stuff, and a good coordinator plays to his strengths, and he had one of the best college quarterbacks. I've told Ari this on the show. I saw North Carolina in person last year, and Drake May is literally one of the best college quarterbacks I've seen in person. And I've seen a lot of SEC quarterbacks over the years. And so he's going to play to his strengths. And so I'd be interested to see what he does this year, but they're going to run the ball, no doubt.
I'm glad that you said that, because that's another thing that Longo made clear. And you can just look at what he's done everywhere he's been over the years. So when he was at Sam Houston, he had a quarterback before Jeremiah Briscoe who was mobile, and they had a lot of rushing yards. Well, Briscoe wasn't that type of quarterback, but they still were able to have a ton of total offense. It just happened in a different way. Again, he threw 57 touchdown passes. When Longo was at North Carolina in 2020, he had 2 very talented running backs. They each ran for 1,000 yards this past season. And he talked about this. They didn't have the veterans. It was a lot of young guys in the running back room, but he had 3 really good tight ends. So he threw the ball to the tight ends as much as anyone in the country. I do think one change, and this may hurt some people in the state of Wisconsin or been Badgers fans, I don't think we're going to see the fullback anymore. With a fullback dive may be gone, because you're going to take that out and you're going to put an extra receiver in there. If you can just look at the personnel that he's used at North Carolina, I think he used 11 personnel like 86% of the time at North Carolina last season, which is the 3rd most in the country. So it's just, they're going to do things in a little bit different way, but it has a chance to put Wisconsin in a different place in the college football world, frankly.
Jesse, we've shared a lot of press boxes in our day, just good times, best friends, being dudes.
Are you trying to make me feel bad? It's early in the morning.
I thought Landis was your best friend.
Particularly a few times in Indianapolis, and I think I remember I thought Wisconsin was going to win one of those. I don't remember what year that was.
2017 and 2019, but 2019, I think they had a 2-touchdown lead at halftime and then crumbled.
Yeah. But I think the one thing that you and I used to talk about at halftimes of those games was, Ohio State's depth for one thing, but also that Wisconsin at the skill position players wear down because they don't have the top end talent at those positions that Ohio State's had, even though they had lines that were good enough to bang in there and, in the first half of games really, punch them in the mouth. Do you think Luke Fickell's arrival makes Wisconsin a more legitimate place for top end skill players? And is that the biggest difference between Wisconsin and the teams that were making the playoff, in your opinion?
I think him bringing Phil Longo in makes it a more attractive destination for top end skill players. If you're talking about offensively,
yeah,
they want to score points. They want to catch the ball. And I've talked to multiple recruits about this. They just got an in-state tight end. His name's Rob Booker II. He's 15, 20 miles away in a town called Waunakee, and he visited campus 3 times last year for games. And he may have ended up at Wisconsin anyway, but he specifically talked about how in this new offense, when he was given a presentation at a junior day visit a few weeks ago, it's so much more attractive to players. You want to catch passes if you're a tight end. You don't always want to necessarily block. And if you're a wide receiver, you want to get the ball. They haven't had kind of that top end wide receiver. And you can see it against the best teams in the country with the 4 and the 5-star defensive backs and the quarterback position as well. I mean, I've mentioned Tanner Mordecai, but the other 2 former 4-star players are Nick Evers, who's an Oklahoma transfer, and Braden Locke, who's a Mississippi State transfer. Those guys have the chance to be the future of the program because Mordecai's a 6th-year senior. So absolutely, I think the offense is a big part of it. And you're right, Ari, when they've played Ohio State, I've said this all the time, over the course of a 60-minute game, the best players emerge and the depth of those positions emerge. When I've said before, when Wisconsin has an injury at a key position like defensive back, the reserve might be a former walk-on or something like that. You could see the difference in Ohio State's speed. That's another area that I think Fickell has tried to upgrade immediately. And I'm not saying the results are going to materialize in year 1. They might. But he got 6 defensive backs in his recruiting class. And I think he's starting to get the types of guys that Wisconsin hasn't. And the perfect example here is a guy named Amari Snowden. So he was previously committed to Cincinnati. Fickell got 3 guys, defensive backs, who were previously committed to Cincinnati to come with him to Wisconsin. But Snowden is 6'3", a corner who's 6'3". Wisconsin doesn't have that. They don't get those kinds of guys. You can look at their roster. There's not a corner on the roster that's taller than 6 feet tall. Snowden's an athlete. He was threw 3 no-hitters as a left-handed pitcher in high school. Wisconsin doesn't have a baseball program, hadn't had a varsity baseball program in 30 years. So it says a lot about the fact that he's coming here because he wanted to play 2 sports. Those are the kinds of guys on the back end that I think can help make a difference, because that's part of the problem, too, that we've seen over the years, where Ohio State just hits a big play over the top because they've got speed and athleticism in a way that Wisconsin doesn't in terms of the physicality to match it.
What about geography, Mitch? Sorry, I know that you haven't asked a question in a minute, but
I'll just go do some work. I'll come back in about 20 minutes. All
right. See ya.
Okay, go ahead.
Are you going to get up?
No. I'm interested to hear what Jesse has to say. But actually, I was going to talk about geography. But
okay, go ahead. Then you ask the question, Mitch.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tie it in. I'm going to tie it into in-state recruiting because, I'm sure you know this, Jesse, but I looked this up. There, 3 blue chippers in the state in 2024. In 23, there were 0. 22, there were 5. 21, there were 3. 20, there were 2. But in 18 and 19, there were 0. So clearly, they cannot rely on in-state talent. So it's a staff with some big Midwestern ties, Cincinnati, all that. Do you look at them being a national recruiting team, or you think they're going to stick to the Midwest?
So there's a lot to this question. I actually just wrote about this week in terms of Fickell's plan for the in-state portion of it. And he's addressed the entire recruiting philosophy, but from an in-state perspective, it's unique this year. And he addressed this as well. His entire coaching staff, his 10-person coaching staff, is coming in here with 0 ties to the state of Wisconsin and the Badgers program. We've seen for years and years that has not been the case at Wisconsin. Last year, Paul Christ, former Badgers player, Jim Leonard, former Badgers player, a couple other staffers had also played at Wisconsin. And so they had this deep intrinsic knowledge of the state. Fickell talked about that's something that he knows he has to overcome, he and his staff, but they're already hitting the in-state guys really hard. They're visiting schools. They're developing those relationships. I think they're going to have as much success with the in-state as the previous staff did, because it's an attractive program. It's the only FBS program in the state. And to your point, it is very cyclical in the state of Wisconsin. Fickell at Cincinnati before relied heavily on guys from Ohio. Well, Ohio has 100+ Division I players every year. Wisconsin, a good year may be 10 or 15 guys. And they're not all necessarily guys who are going to get Wisconsin offers. in the last recruiting class in 2023, Wisconsin had one in-state offer. That's ridiculous. Now, that guy was the #1 player. He's a running back named Nate White, and he committed to Wisconsin. But in 2024, they've got offers out to 6 uncommitted players and already have a commit. But you're right. You can't just build it on in-state guys. What he has said is and he uses this term, the core and the crux of our program will be built around a 350-mile radius is what he has said. And that's what he did at Cincinnati. It's just going to be a little different math here. In-state at Wisconsin and the Chicago area are his 2 biggest areas. And you've seen what they've done in terms of going into Chicago and the Chicagoland area to try and recruit. But Minneapolis is also a part of that. And I think that there's some surrounding areas that are going to be vital too. So Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio stretches a little bit beyond that in some places. But because of his ties to the state, I think he's going to have a ton of success there. But that is where it starts. And then I think you go and get guys outside of that region that you believe are good fits. There's, I think, going to be a mirror of what they did under the previous staff, where you're not going to get every 4 or 5-star guy. You're not going to get in the mix when Ohio State and USC and all these other programs, Alabama, Georgia, are in it. But if you can develop relationships early and sell your program well, you'll have an opportunity to pluck a handful of guys that stretch beyond that radius. But again, the core and the crux, 300 to 350 miles. And I think there's enough talent there to start with. It's just not all in the state of Wisconsin. Illinois for them has to be huge.
I'm really curious how he's going to do Ohio.
Yeah, and obviously the competition there is fierce, as we know. You start with Ohio State.
But he's like the godfather of Ohio recruiting.
Yeah, I think he's going to have a lot of success, to be honest. And again, some of the guys that he pulled were already obviously committed to him at Cincinnati, but they're Ohio natives. He's got good relationships with coaches there, and that's where it starts, because the coaches are willing to talk to the players and recommend a program and just get a foot in the door. And I think when players see what Wisconsin is about and the changes that they're making, it's a much more attractive place.
Ari, I wanted to ask you a question as our recruiting quote-unquote expert, and Ari's fired up. He's getting a question. So something, I think a lot of programs, a lot of fans, they love when coaches are hired. He's got ties, or, he knows the area. I think that's overrated. That's a bonus, but I would never not hire a coach because he doesn't have ties. I think Luke Fickell and his staff, they're smart enough. They know to go visit the high schools and all that. And Ari loves when I talk about Vanderbilt, but James Franklin was hired. I don't think anyone on his staff had coached in Tennessee, no really SEC ties. And that's the best Vanderbilt's done in 30 years recruiting the state of Tennessee, because they knew what they were doing and they made the relationship. So I think that's all overrated.
Yeah, I agree with that to a certain extent, because Luke Fickell is a big enough brand now. I mean, when you think about the brand itself of what Wisconsin got, of all the big time hires of the last 2 years, last year's coaching carousel was crazy. He's the only one that's that's made the playoff, right? Outside of Lincoln Riley. Oh, I guess Brian Kelly made it too. But, he was the first coach that ever took a group of 5 team to one. This is a successful, proven coach who, I think no matter who the coach is at Wisconsin, it doesn't have to be a Wisconsin alum, is going to have a good time, with in-state players. Now, it's about whether or not that coach has the wherewithal and the drive to take Wisconsin into other areas of the country. So, for me, the relationships thing is great, but the thing that Luke Fickell did, at least when I covered him at Ohio State, that was so good, was he would find a 3-star quarterback and turn him into a first-round pick at linebacker. He has a eye for talent in relationships with coaches in Ohio that he trusts, where if he says this guy is going to be a player, he might be undersized and he might not be good enough, in high school to go to Ohio State, but he understands that if they develop, go look at Kobe Bryant. That kid's older brother played, Christian Bryant played at Ohio State. He was never going to get an offer to Ohio State because he wasn't big enough, and then he turns out to be one of the best DBs in college football. And I think that there is a certain developmental aspect to those relationships that it's not just, I know your coach, so I'm going to get a really good player. It's, I have a good enough relationship with the coach to get the inside scoop of somebody who isn't going to bullshit me about whether or not somebody has the upside that I think that they do, and get there early enough to get them. So, I think that Wisconsin has, 4 or 5 different avenues that it can take to get players, all of which they could be very successful at. And, I like the 350-mile radius. I like to see them get up into Winnipeg and see if they can find anybody up there. But yeah, no, I am really high on this hire. And I've always thought that, the idea of a program ceiling was always so, short-sighted. I always thought that teams that, people think had a perceived ceiling could hire the right guy and get them through that ceiling. And as Jesse pointed out earlier on the show, I think Wisconsin and Penn State might have been the two biggest beneficiaries of this expanded playoff. And as Wisconsin has a coach that has already made the 4-team field, that understands how to build a winning product, and frankly has spent 10 years or more at an Ohio State program that has competed at the highest level, knows exactly what it takes to win those games. Like, I think Wisconsin could really build something here. And of all the coaching hires that I think we've seen the last few years, and maybe say for a few big-time hires like USC and Lincoln Riley, might have been the most impressive one that we've seen. And I'm like really high on them right now. And I think that it's kind of juiced up Jesse, right? Like you're ready to cover those Badgers, baby, because I think it's going to be fun.
I've never been more excited to cover spring practice, and it's February. So that'll tell you a lot, but it's also that the fans are excited and the readers are excited. And so that's invigorating from the beat writer's perspective. But it's interesting that you brought up Kobe Bryant, because I wrote about this a couple months ago after Fickell was hired. I talked to Ted Ginn Sr., who's a legendary coach at Glenville High School in Cleveland. He's been there since 1976, and he was Kobe Bryant's coach. And he was telling me about Bryant was a lightly recruited kid. And because Fickell this goes back to the relationships part, but it also goes back to a trust factor and an ability to identify talent that maybe other people don't see, that Ginn Sr. was telling Fickell and Marcus Freeman, this was back when Marcus Freeman was there, that like, if you can keep him from being overconfident in his athletic ability and make him more fundamentally sound, he's got a chance to be an unbelievable player. And Fickell saw those traits. They brought him in, and he becomes the Jim Thorpe Award winner for the nation's best defensive back. So, yeah, it goes back to relationships, but it's also about identifying talent and being willing to take a chance on guys. And I think that says a lot, that you get a kid that a lot of people didn't really want it, and he becomes the best defensive back in the country. But he's an incredible recruiter. I talked to Jim Tressel about this too, that when Fickell was at Ohio State, because Tressel was the one who gave him a chance, obviously 20 plus years ago to Ohio State, he said Fickell would go into areas that they hadn't traditionally had recruiting success or had no ties to, and he would get the best players. And I think that says an awful lot as well. There's certain traits that I think are going to carry over and make him tremendously successful. This staff already has shown they are relentless in their recruiting ability. That's something that I think Wisconsin needed to help elevate the program. But it's Fickell's, and you know this, Ari, his competitive desire. Like, I asked him a question, and this is when I learned very early on about who Luke Fickell is. I asked him a question in one of his first press conferences with us, the Wisconsin reporters. They were going to play in the Guaranteed Rate Bowl against Oklahoma State. A bunch of guys weren't going to play in it. Wisconsin's 3-team captains who had led the program all season for 2, 3, 4-year starters, all gone. 2 declared for the draft. Graham Mertz transferred. And I said, you have any concerns about fielding a competitive team, knowing how many players on your roster aren't here, including the 3 captains? I could just see like the look in his eyes and the way that his facial expressions changed when he answered the question about, like, it would be totally disrespectful to think that we would come in here and not field a competitive team, and to say that the guys who are on the roster right now can't play good football. They went out and they won the freaking game. So I think those are some traits that are really going to help Wisconsin. And it obviously starts with Fickell.
Yeah, Jesse. While we've got him here, I want to just bounce around the Big Ten a little bit too, because Big Ten West, we might be getting rid of division soon and all that, but you look, it's like some teams are trending up, some are down. Like, I'd say Purdue, Ryan Walters might be a great coach, but Jeff Brom, highly respected. Illinois, trending up as a program, but they haven't really, Ari, do you agree? Like, they're not like recruiting at this crazy level. So I guess my question is, Nebraska with Matt Rule's going to recruit pretty well. How do you see Wisconsin and Fickell from a recruiting standpoint fitting in the West? Do you think they can sign consistently the best classes in the West, or among the teams in the West right now?
Right, because there's not going to be the divisions as we know it in 2024 when USC and UCLA come in. That's going to make it pretty interesting. But yes, I absolutely think so. They're never going to be Ohio State. They're not going to have top 5, at least. I don't want to put a ceiling on Wisconsin, but we've seen what Ohio State's done consistently for decades. But as far as the teams that are in the West right now, I absolutely think Wisconsin should be leaders of the pack in that area. And Nebraska certainly would be in that mix as well. Nebraska is another program where they've got to be a national brand and go out and get guys well beyond the in-state borders. But this staff knows the importance of recruiting and roster management and building. And I also think that the transfer portal is going to be huge, but certainly this program, and when I think of what the recruiting ceiling could be for Wisconsin, so they've had one top 25 class ever in the online ranking era. It was that 2021 class that I had mentioned before. They finished 16th. The 2020 was number 26. The one with Graham Mertz in 2019 was number 29. I don't see any reason why Wisconsin can't be a top 30 or top 25 recruiting program because of how good these guys are, at how relentless they are. There's
I think
so
it's going to
many
be
examples.
top 15, Jesse.
That's a possibility too. Like, I'm just giving a starting point because it's something we haven't consistently seen at Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
If you get into the top 25, and obviously the teams generally appear or have appeared in the 4-team college football playoff, they're recruiting at a level that's even higher than that. But if the idea is, okay, Wisconsin has done more with less for so long, and they've been maybe the best team that hasn't broken through, what happens when you start to get better players and you've got a more attractive offense? Like, Wisconsin is right on the cusp. And with the hires that they've made, I think this is a program that has an opportunity to break through. And I'm not saying that means they're going to win a national title, but you can start with getting into the college football playoff to give yourself a chance, which is something that has eluded this program.
Now, Ari knows this. We're working on a project, Jesse, kind of our recruiting staff here, where we are ranking the programs from a recruiting standpoint, recruiting potential, and we're factoring in who the head coach is and what the programs have going for them. And Ari, I want my Wisconsin vote back. We're not done with this yet. We haven't tallied all these votes. I'm looking at the spreadsheet now, and I have Wisconsin the lowest among the people that have voted so far. So
what is it?
I'm not saying.
Oh, you don't want to give the milk away for free? Or
No,
are you embarrassed?
I'm embarrassed. I've got Wisconsin 33 right now. Ari has them. Ari, do you remember where you had them?
I don't know.
You had them 23. I will say this was a fun task. It is
Jesse?
one of the more
Top
difficult.
25.
It would be one of the difficult tasks. Now, I guess there's 69 teams now with the 4 new Big 12 teams, and everyone who's done this probably has regrets on these votes. Like, I'm kind of contradicting myself here because Wisconsin has recruited over the past 5 years. The recruiting average, Jesse, is probably in the mid-20s because of that 16 class. So they hire a great recruiting coach, and I vote them lower than what they've been. So that probably wasn't very smart on my end.
I think you were too beholden on previous rankings and not.
Well, I mean, I factored in Colorado. I factored in Dion.
I know you have to factor in the future.
Yeah. I know. Well, that's why we have 8 people doing this, and part of the reason is because
we can cancel out your crappy votes. Yeah,
some crappy votes. I think mine, except for I'm looking at my ranks right now. They're spot on, except for Wisconsin. But you've done it, Jesse. You've done a great job convincing us that the Badgers are going to win multiple national titles.
I already put a futures bet in for national championship this year.
While
Tanner Mordecai.
Yeah.
Tanner Mordecai for the win. I actually cannot wait to watch Graham Mertz play because I'm very curious about whether that was a Graham Mertz problem or a Wisconsin problem.
Who's going to win the Jack Miller versus Graham Mertz battle, Ari, for quarterback?
Graham Mertz.
Okay.
He's my guy. I'm betting for him to win the Heisman this year.
Okay.
I don't know. Like, do you think it's possible that it was a Wisconsin problem and not a Graham Mertz problem?
It could be. It was a failure on everybody's part. I think that's a reasonable way to put it. Like, they brought him into an offense that he didn't run in high school, which that happens a lot. But I think he would have been much better in a little bit different system, one that is more closely aligned with what Phil Longo runs. They were under center, they were play action, and I think there were times where his decision making was not what it needed to be. He struggled like a lot of quarterbacks do when he was under pressure, and he had to move his feet. And I also think he put too much pressure on himself. I mean, to be the guy that people wanted him to be, he worked hard, did all the right things, but the results didn't necessarily show up. And the offense just didn't do him any favors. I mentioned before how often there were stacked boxes. Like, when the defense knows what's coming and you're in a position where it's predictable when you're going to throw the ball or what types of offense you're going to run, that's not ideal. He had 3 offensive coordinators and 3 quarterbacks coaches in the last 3 seasons. Like, how do you gain a level of consistency when that's going on? And I should mention that Paul Chryst brought in an offensive coordinator this year in Bobby Ingram, who had never called plays before. That doesn't mean you can't be good at it, but like, you're putting yourself in a unique position, I'll say that, when that's what you have going on.
The thing that I think about Fickell too, Mitch, and you can tell me if you've gotten this impression too, Jesse, but like, I am very fascinated, and I've talked to Mitch about this in the past with like Trey Lance's recruitment, right? The fact that he was in Big Ten country, or at least Big Ten West country, and that no coach was able to identify his upside as a quarterback is like fascinating to me. And it's not that, you know, they should have predicted that he was going to be a first-round pick or turn out to be an NFL starter. But you're telling me that Minnesota couldn't find a spot on the roster for somebody that's like a lottery ticket, or Wisconsin couldn't find a spot on the roster for a guy like that? And I wonder if Fickell will be more of a gambler when it comes to certain scholarship spots too. Like if there is another raw athlete like that that's big and strong and has a big arm who wants to play quarterback and has physical tools that you just don't see at programs in the Big Ten West very often, do you take a flyer on a guy and give him a shot to potentially, like, because could you imagine if Trey Lance played at Wisconsin?
But I think it depends on, I mean, very, very good points, Ari, but I think it also depends on what caliber you're recruiting at, what caliber player you're recruiting. Because if you think you've got more kids that you're more certain about, it's like Ohio State. They weren't going to give Kobe Bryant a second look because they didn't need to. Cincinnati had a spot for him to try and develop, where, you know, you don't want to take 5 Kobe Bryants a year and have, you know, obviously if one turns out to be as good, then it's worth the risk.
But I don't know if it's a Wisconsin problem, but like you could sit here for 5 hours and you could not convince me why Minnesota didn't take that kid.
I just think that the landscape's also littered with schools like that taking kids that don't pan out too. It's easy to sit here and say.
I think I would, if I have 4 scholarship quarterbacks on my roster, like most coaches do, I think each one would have 1 lottery ticket in there. Because I think it's a waste to have 4 to begin with. I think it's a worthy use of a scholarship to try to go after somebody who's extremely athletic and raw at a place like that. Because if you hit on one, it could be the difference between, you know, a great season and a bad one 3 years down the line. And like, if anybody is able to uncover that potential or to notice that potential, or at least buy into it based on his track record, I think Luke Fickell would fit into that space. So
it's hard for me to answer definitively what they're going to do because they've only been here for a couple months, and I think Phil Longo is obviously going to have the biggest say in what they do at quarterback. There's a certain type of quarterback that he likes. He wants somebody with some mobility, someone who's taller, and he specifically talked about that at Wisconsin, that has an offensive line where the tackles and even the guards are 6'7", 6'8". But, you know, I don't know. Hindsight's 2020. Trey Lance was a 3-star prospect and the number 49 dual threat quarterback, and there are going to be other quarterbacks that coaches have higher on their board. You can only get one guy in a cycle. So where are you going to devote your resources to? And you've got to be more sure of them earlier in their careers so you can get some of those top level quarterbacks. Some guys are late bloomers and they don't really emerge until later on in the scene. So it's really hard to answer that question. But what I would say is I feel pretty confident at this point that Wisconsin is going to go out and get the best quarterback that it can to fit this system at a much higher clip than they've done, I think, consistently, because of what we've seen out of the transfer portal. It's been really remarkable to get 3 former 4-star guys.
And Wisconsin has 19 quarterbacks on its current roster right now, so you know maybe they'll yeah, they have a spot. I mean, the kid was 6'4" and 200 and some pounds, and I don't know.
I'm just glad Ari's not an athletic director. He would have fired PJ Fleck like just after the draft, after Trey Lance was drafted 3rd overall. And just like, why didn't you sign this guy?
Think about how many players those schools sign that don't ever.
But they didn't. Play. No one knew that. I mean, it's so
a crapshoot, Ari.
Crapshoot.
I mean, you're looking at the
quarterbacks. I'm saying I want to throw the crapshoot dice on a player who plays that position.
Okay. By the way, Wisconsin down 1 quarterback from, you know, even when the season ended.
I edited a breaking news story the other night from Jesse when he had a good source that led on that I'm drawing a blank on his name, the 6-year
Chase
season.
Wolf. Yeah.
Chase. Well, why don't you tell the story? Chase Wolf started in the bowl game because it is an interesting story what he was told by the staff. So tell the story.
Well, this will tell you that Wisconsin has too many good quarterbacks on the roster, which is something I don't know that I could have put in a sentence for a lot of other years. So Chase Wolf was a 5th-year senior this year. He was basically a career backup the last 3 years behind Graham Mertz. Graham transfers, ends up at Florida, so they need a starter for the bowl game, and they only had 2 scholarship quarterbacks going into the game. Chase starts. He helps the team win the game, and he announces after the game that he's actually going to come back for a 6th season because he's already talked to Phil Longo and Luke Fickell. Wolf is a Cincinnati native who earned a scholarship from Fickell when Fickell was with the Bearcats, so he liked that. And then at the time, this is according to the source that I spoke to, they told Chase that he would have an opportunity to compete for the starting job. Well, that makes sense. I mean, they told him they were going to get 2 or 3 transfer quarterbacks, but at the time they had one transfer quarterback in the fold, Nick Evers from Oklahoma. 3 days after the bowl game, they get Tanner Mordecai, the automatic starter as far as I'm concerned. And then 11 days after that, they get Braden Locke, the kid from Mississippi State. So now all of a sudden you're looking at, okay, if Chase Wolf is in the mix, that's 6 scholarship quarterbacks. The math doesn't seem to make sense there. And based on the source that I spoke to, Wolf had a conversation with Phil Longo a couple days before he was supposed to enroll or come to campus with the team in January. And they told him that he wasn't going to have an opportunity to compete to be the starter because Tanner Mordecai is going to be the starter, which to me is no great surprise. The rest of the quarterbacks combined have barely played. So Chase decided not to come back is the point of this. So they are now down to 5 scholarships.
To come back, Jesse? Was that we want a scholar? Well, because there's nothing. It's only one semester. No, it's they could have used a scholarship on a transfer.
I don't get the sense they ever said like we don't want you. I mean, they may have felt that because again, you only have so many scholarships, and this isn't a situation now where because you take a COVID year, you just get a free scholarship. Like you still count. You count against the team now,
right?
I think it was more. I could see either side. Like the staff is being upfront and honest with him by saying Tanner Mordecai, the dude was he 2-time Davey O'Brien Award semifinalist. Like he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He's going to be our guy. So we're letting you know where things stand. And the other side would be that, well, Chase was told he'd have an opportunity to compete and he's not going to get that. And he's been a career backup, so he doesn't want to do that. But either way, there's no more Chase Wolf on the roster. They've got 5 scholarship quarterbacks, 3 of whom are from the transfer portal. And then 2 were already with the team. One's an incoming freshman, one's a redshirt freshman. So it'll be fascinating to see how it unfolds and how reps are divvied up in spring practice. But there's just so many storylines going on at Wisconsin right now.
Ari, any more Badger questions before we move on to some other items?
No, I think that was pretty thorough, and Jesse is clearly knowledgeable and handsome. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.
More knowledgeable or handsome? What comes first, handsome or knowledge?
I don't know.
Tie? Okay.
They're both perfect.
Some notable 2024 commitments. Ari, here's a guy that I think could be worth the story. Jamari Colley, a wide receiver from South Oak Cliff in Dallas, number 167 overall, commits to SMU. Maybe he thought Tanner Mordecai was still the quarterback at SMU. He didn't realize that he was a Badger. But for SMU to get, and it's a long way before signing day, but for SMU to get that caliber of a kid, even if he's local, based on the fallout and them not getting the Big 12 invite, although there's rumblings about Pac-12 commissioners visiting SMU's campus today. But Ari, to me, that one kind of stood out this week.
Yeah, that's kind of like the same situation when it's the Preston Stone, one a few years ago of like, well, how can SMU be attractive to somebody when they're not in a Power 5 conference in the city of Dallas? And, when I visited SMU, when I first moved to Dallas a few years ago, it kind of became apparent quickly that they have a lot to offer. So, not surprised by this. But at the same time, there's a lot of time between now and the end of the cycle. So good get. Now hold on to him.
Yeah. And Colorado, 4-star from Louisiana, Jawan Johnson, athlete. Again, long way to go. I'm sure LSU will still be in the mix there, but pretty good get for Deion going out of state.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and he was an LSU lead the entire time.
And a couple more. Walker White, you wrote about him in the 10 most on your big board last week. Quarterback from Little Rock.
Walter White.
Did I say? No, it's Walker White.
His name's not Walter White?
It's not Walter White. It's Walker White. Different. He's from Little Rock, not from Albuquerque.
Do his parents own a car wash?
They might. I don't know. I don't.
All right,
know.
I can't keep making this joke.
But the interesting part here was it looked. I know for the day of his commitment, a lot of Clemson. There's a lot of Clemson chatter. The last minute, Auburn gets him. Hugh Freeze working his magic.
He's somebody I want to get on the phone.
Okay.
Because that could be the first. He could be the fixture of the turn of the guards. Like Auburn was a complete and utter shitburger on the recruiting trail for the past 2 years, and now they're going out and getting a top 150 player, a quarterback right off the jump that Clemson wanted. I think that's a pretty good start to the Hugh Freeze era for sure.
Yeah. So a few more commitments we're going to go over, and we got trivia. We told Jesse to hang on. We got some.
Yes.
We got a trivia question.
He was eager to get out of here. But
yeah, I know. So yeah,
Mazio, what do you have going on? I mean, you can't wait 10 more minutes.
I'm a beat writer. I got
Yeah.
stories to write. I'm not a
there's
national recruiting guy. We're gonna just pop in once a week and do mailbag.
Exactly. Mazio Bennett, a wide receiver from Greenville, South Carolina, who was committed to Tennessee last year for a while. Number 217 overall, is committed to South Carolina, continues that great run that Shane Beamer and that staff is going there. They look like they have the potential to put together a monster 24 class. Good in-state get from Michigan, Jacob Oden, athlete from Harper Woods, Michigan, number 160 overall to the Wolverines.
No, South Carolina, I wanted to add, has 5 commitments in the 24 cycle, and all of them are top 300 players.
Yes, so great start. Obviously, getting Nicholas Harbor to close out the 23 class. Great sign there, too. Elijah Bosa, if I'm pronouncing that right, Bosa, wide receiver from Mesquite, Texas, number 357 to Arizona State, the first 2024 commit for that new staff. And then I think this might have happened last week as we were recording. We talked about it briefly. Austin Mack, a quarterback from Folsom, California, to Washington. The interesting thing about him is he's 356 in the composite, but I think he's a top 100 player in 247, just has not been evaluated by all the services. He will be a guy that I think will be clearly a top 100 guy when this is all said and done. All right, Jesse, you ready for a little trivia?
Good updates, man. No, I'm proud of you. That was inspiring.
Let's do it.
You're inspired by that?
Yeah, honestly, I can't.
You're easily inspirable then. So
yeah, no, I thought it was incredible what you just did there as a host.
See what I have to do with Jesse? I have to deal with this every week. How many of the top 10 Wisconsin recruits of the modern era can you name? Don't cheat.
All right, I got my hands here, right? I'm not looking at my phone.
Okay.
Keep your hands up.
You don't need to go in order.
All-time 247.
Getting back to 2000. Usually we go 2002 because that's when Rivals started, but the 247 database goes back to 2000. So,
okay. Josh Oglesby was an offensive tackle from the state in 07.
Yes. Wow. Ari, this is not only is he getting the name, he's getting the position in the year.
I think it's a lot easier when you don't have
4 or 5
million 5-star prospects. But yeah.
And they're probably an offensive tackle, but go ahead.
Yeah. Logan Brown was a 5-star prospect in 2019. He was the first 5-star since Oglesby, so that's why it's easy to keep track of.
Correct. 2 for 2.
Nolan Rucci was a 5-star offensive lineman from Pennsylvania in the 2021 class.
3 for 3.
Now, this is where it gets hard because I think there were 1 or 2 other 5-star guys that predate me. Hawthorne, is that and what is it?
This is Jeopardy. Last names are acceptable.
That counts.
Yeah.
And Taj
Hawthorne.
Yeah.
What position? Not that you don't need to know, but
boy. Defense, I think. Defensive
line. There's a lot
line.
of positions on defense. Yeah, defensive line.
Defensive tackle.
Defensive line 2001.
Defensive line. So that's 4 5-star guys. Now this is where it gets tough. There's 1 more 5-star, Mitch.
There's 1 more 5-star.
Ooh. Well, he definitely predates me. He's from Portage.
I didn't write that down. I don't know. He could be. I just wrote down the name, the position, in the year.
He is from Portage, Wisconsin.
Okay, so I know this because he's in the same class as Joe Thomas. They were the top 2 recruits in the state that year.
Does he have a name?
I'm assuming he does have a name. Justin. Oshowski. What is it?
Ari, can we give it to him?
Yeah.
Ostrowski.
Ostrowski.
Okay.
I mean, we're going 20 years back. I've only been covering him since 2011. Yeah. So
you got to know your program's history. You got to have the institutional knowledge. Okay, you need 5 more.
True. Now, this is where it's hard because, to Ari's point, like the rest are 4-stars. So now I have to remember who was the highest of the high 4-stars. And I don't know that I have the. I don't know that I.
Educated guesses will work. I'll give you a hint. Only one of them signed when you covered the team.
In the last 11 years?
Yes.
Yeah.
My God.
Well, good luck.
Yeah.
You're close on one of them.
I'm gonna say Graham Mertz.
Number 10.
Yeah. All right. So for now, he's in the top 10.
Yeah.
And the other 4. Is Brett Bell in there, cornerback?
Yes. 2001.
2001.
Good call.
All right. That's 7. I would take a C in any class, by the way.
You've already done better than most people do, so if you want to give up, you can give up.
Well, the last
keep
3
going.
4-star guys, which are pre-2011, is really difficult for me because I wasn't around it every day. So I will.
One was a really good running back.
Yes.
Oh, let's see. Who's the highest rated running back they've gotten in that span?
Yeah, but
Since
so
Rondane
he's the
predates
highest rated
them.
running back of the modern recruiting era.
Oh, is it Brian Calhoun?
It is not.
No, not Brian Calhoun.
Kind of whispered that, like, is it?
Yeah, because I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Oh man.
All right, can we get a little background music? Can you say?
No, I don't want to. I don't want to waste precious seconds for the viewers. I can't remember.
John Clay.
John Clay.
Okay, so number 6 was Travis Beckham, tight end, 2005. Yeah. John Clay, number 7, running back, 2007. You mentioned Brett Bell. Darius Jones, a linebacker in 2000. And then Graham Mertz. And then 5 more guys, 11 through 15. Nick Hayden, defensive lineman, 2004. Trey Wedig, is that how you pronounce the last name? 2020, offensive tackle. Joe Brunner, offensive tackle, 22. Dan Volz, offensive lineman, 2012.
If you would have gotten some of those 2000 guys, I would have accused you of cheating.
Yeah. Travis Beckham, if I'm not mistaken, was actually listed on the 24/7 composite as an outside linebacker. If I'm not mistaken, or was he listed as a tight end?
The list I had was a tight end.
All right. Well, I did the best I could, guys.
No, he was an outside linebacker, Jesse. You're right about that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, on the list on the bottom, I think
it says tight end because it's his current position, but on his profile, it's outside linebacker.
Gotcha. One mailbag question because we got just a few minutes. Ari answered in his mailbag. I want Jesse's answer for this too. If you're a coaching staff, this is from Robert D. Would you rather have 3 5-stars and 3 3-star recruits, or 6 4-star recruits? If you had 6 spots available in your class, Jesse.
Ari already answered this one?
Yeah. In his written mailbag, you've clearly read it this morning, right? It was just published.
The first thing he did when he woke up.
Yeah, first thing you did. You don't take care of your kid, you just read the mailbag.
I feel like I want to guess what Ari said.
Okay.
I want to say that Ari said the 3 5-stars.
Of course.
Because stars matter and top-end talent is the difference in college football. Is that your...
You could have answered that question a lot more succinctly than Ari did.
No, I thought I gave
your answer was good. That's No. Part of it is that Ari, the difference in 4 stars. The caliber.
Because you could get 6 players that rank in between 250 and 400 and that not have an impact and not really be that much different than a 3-star that ranks 551. So I took the top 30 players nationally because I thought that the impact that they would have on your team would be more tangible.
I think I tend to agree because, to Ari's point, if I'm not mistaken, generally in a given recruiting cycle, there's about 32 5-star players, which mirror the number of first-round draft picks. So you're talking about guys that are the elite of the elite. And I mean, if you're a program like Wisconsin, we've seen how many 3-star guys they get who 3-4 years later basically play like 4 or 5-star guys, but they don't get many of the 5-star guys. As your previous question illustrated, it's sort of ridiculous to consider the fact that in the 24 years of the internet recruiting ranking era, they've had 5 5-star players. I think there were going to start to be more of them, but still not very many.
Well, there's a lot of programs, and this has been trivia questions on past pods that have had far fewer than 5 stars, as we know.
I mean, think about how many college football programs currently have less than – I mean, the team that played for the national championship game didn't have 3 5-stars on their roster. Most teams don't have a total of 3. So especially considering the fact 9 of the 32 went to one school this year.
I've got one question for both you guys before we go. Since Ari, you covered him, and Jesse, you're covering now for the past few months. Is Luke Fickell's makeup? Is he a guy that in 2 or 3 years with some success at Wisconsin is going to be like people are going to be talking about him as an NFL coach, or is he just a college coach? Ari?
I want Ari to go first because
I don't know the answer to that question. I think that if the Ohio State job were to ever open, he'd walk back to Columbus to be the head coach there. And I think he kind of got a raw deal being the interim head coach there when the program was a disaster. Funny enough, thinking about all the things that are occurring in college football now, how ridiculous the shambles was, what caused them to be in shambles at that time. But that was a tough position to put him in. But I don't know if he has any desire to be an NFL head coach.
I'm not asking desire too, like just the makeup. I mean, which is a tough question because what's in,
I don't know. Like his best friend's Mike Vrabel, and he turned out to be pretty good.
Yeah.
So,
well, when Vrabel, as Joe Rexrode wrote, when Vrabel goes to take the Ohio State job, then Fickell can come down here and be the Titans
head coach. Yeah. I don't know. The NFL jump is always fascinating to me because I personally, if I were an NFL GM, would not want to do that at all under any circumstance.
You would not want to hire a college coach.
I think it's two different sports, two different personalities, and some people can make the jump, but I think more often than not, it doesn't work out.
Well,
it's different to coach a 17 or 18-year-old kid than it is a 35-year-old millionaire.
Right. And that's why I thought, James Franklin, all the James Franklin NFL talk was kind of crazy years ago that I just think he's a college coach. I just don't see him being an NFL coach, but certain NFL, like Ryan Day, do you think, Ari, both you guys, you're around the Big Ten, Jesse, like there's a lot of Ryan Day talk. His temperament seems to be that he could do both more so than some other coaches.
Well, Ryan Day probably fits the offensive-minded, young. And
he's been in the NFL too.
It seems like that he fits the mold of what the type of coach that the NFL finds attractive more than a group. But like I thought that the Vrabel to Tennessee thing was weird, and then he went out there and he's been awesome. So I don't know. From just like a nuts and bolts, what does the NFL want? I think that Ryan Day illustrates more qualities from that perspective than Luke Fickell would, but I don't know if Ryan Day would be a better NFL coach than Fickell would be.
Those are hard questions to answer. I mean, Ohio State operates in a way that very few programs do, and in some sense is as close to an NFL program in college as there is, other than maybe a couple other schools, but the way you have to construct your roster is completely different. But in terms of mindset and tenacity and all those things, if you're the best at what you do, I always feel like you generally want to take it as high as you can. So maybe with Fickell, I mean, he just got here. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that. I think Badgers fans are more concerned about what would happen in a situation where the Ohio State job is open. But right now, he's got a program to build at Wisconsin and make the Badgers a college football playoff contender.
Is that a Ari Wasserman middle school football jersey that's framed over your right shoulder there? Is that what you have up on your wall, Jesse?
Yeah, Ari sent it to me and signed it. And
it's a New York Yankees jersey.
I'm not a Yankees fan. It's actually an autographed Mike Mussina jersey that my wife got me. Mike Mussina's been my guy since 1992 or 93 when I was, 6 or 7 or 8 and opened a pack of cards, and there he was. And I don't know what it was that sparked it. I think it was 92. He was in the midst of a really good second year in the majors. Oof. And I got on the bandwagon early, which I'm happy to report because he became a Hall of Fame pitcher, and I actually went out with my dad and my brother-in-law to Cooperstown to watch him get inducted in the Hall of Fame in 2019. So,
so he's your favorite athlete of all time?
That's very cool.
Do you have a Mike Mussina rookie card?
Up here, not too far away, I have a box of cards that have probably been in that box for 25, 30 years. I've got over 200 Mike Mussina cards. I used to go to all the card shows in Kansas City where I grew up, and I knew in my head which ones I had and which ones I didn't. Now, that was before they made 4 million cards a year. But
are you in the hobby now?
Cards. No, haven't been for a long time. It was a childhood thing for me.
It's a money pit addiction that I have.
I've got Ari's been in my bonus room. I'm pointing over here into our storage closet. I have about 100,000 baseball cards in boxes from in the 80s, and basically until I went to college. I spent all my money on baseball cards in the 80s.
Look at this stuff right on my desk. I'm organizing them.
Yeah. So, but at least your favorite player was pretty good, Jesse. My favorite
Vladimir Guerrero.
It's autographed. Oh man, you guys are gonna make me do it.
And graded.
Uh-oh, he's going to get it.
Okay.
All right, let's see. Oh, wow.
This came from my childhood bedroom from when I was a kid. Emmett Smith rookie card.
I got some good ones. Right at the top is a gigantic Mike Mussina. But
so do you have a preference on like Orioles, Yankees Mussina, or just Mussina?
Oh, I 100% prefer the Orioles Mussina because that's where it started with my childhood.
True. Okay.
Should I throw this in the trash?
What is it? I can't see. I can't.
Zach Wilson.
Yeah, maybe. I don't. I wouldn't. I'd sell if you could.
Yeah, there's an entire stack of Mike Mussina cards. It's there's far too many to count.
Okay, well, Ari, we should probably wrap this up.
Yeah, I have to go to a workout, so I was trying to delay it as much as possible. But Jesse and I have a lot of the same interests, and if I would have found out that he was like into collecting and buying and selling sports cards the way that I am, that would.
I don't think he is. I think he was.
He was. That's why I asked him, "Are you still in the hobby?" Look, I'm like going through my random slabs box here.
You gonna take us home, Ari?
Thank you for joining the latest edition of Stars Matter. We will talk to you next week. I mean, what, you can't say that? I mean,
it's your job.
Bye.
I do all the research. I do the intro. I get the guest.
I'm the talent, Dennis.
You have 20 seconds to get us out smoothly.
I do. And you do everything.
So,
I do nothing.
Jesse, thank you very, very much for joining us. It was good to catch up and good to talk Wisconsin recruiting. We will have you on again in the near future.
Thanks, guys. Take care.